wake up at 3 a.m. and have an insight. Okay. Throughout the lectures this time, I'm speaking always about Nama-Rupa. So we continue to return to that. It's interesting that in the Pali Canon, they give a metaphor for Nama-Rupa, which is a worldwide metaphor. And that is that a blind man asks a cripple to climb up on his shoulders. The cripple becomes the eyes, and the blind man becomes the legs. So the blind man needs the cripple on his back to tell him where to go. Go straight ahead, turn left, stop. And it's a simile that, or a metaphor, and I'm not sure which one it is, I guess it's a metaphor, is that things are often makeshift. They really, in one sense, have very weak basis, but they work. Even if it's a put-together thing with a blind man and a cripple, it works. They can actually make their way through the world. One has the legs and one has the eyes. So for Nama-Rupa, in the Buddhist text, it's interesting, they use that metaphor for Nama-Rupa. That is, Rupa is the legs, and Nama is the eyes which ride on top of that physical form. You find the same image all over Europe, Eurasia. I don't know where it originated. I don't know who first had it, whether they borrowed it from the Buddhists, but it certainly exists in the Pali Canon, and it exists for Nama-Rupa. And that may have been the original thing for it, with this idea of the cripple and the blind person. So the Nama-Rupa, which we're talking about, is the individual, ourselves. And we're an awkward combination of the mental and the physical. And it's very difficult to understand how it all works because each one has a certain weakness in the argument. And you would think that it wouldn't quite work. How can you have both mental and physical? How in the world can the mental and the physical ever relate to one another in a way which is functional? Because they seem so different. So that's why the Buddhists, I think, put this into their literature to say it is awkward. Both have weaknesses. Neither one works together that well. It's a strange combination of the mental and the physical. But once they're together, it works. So it's efficient, even if it's awkward. And it is certainly awkward. The Buddhists have struggled with this forever, as do the whole world. We're still struggling. Is there a mind which is separated from the physical brain? And if so, how does that mind work as separated from the physical brain? Or is it that all experience is merely physical and it's in our brain? And there is nothing that is metaphysical, above the physical? Or is experience partly metaphysical, partly separated from the physical. So there's still arguments. You can go and read it. One of the people who addresses it, he's very controversial, but he's a good writer and he's very thoughtful, and that's Alan Wallace of the Santa Barbara. Alan Wallace's works deal with this many times. He constantly returns to this theme. He himself wishes to say that there is a non-physical mind in his belief, and therefore he will not accept that all experience is by the brain and is physical. But that's just an indication that the battle is still raging as to how in the world you can put these two together, or can you? Are they an efficient, functioning team? It's like we don't hook up horses to wagons very often anymore. So we don't remember that if you wanted to have a smooth ride in a carriage or a wagon, you had to have horses that were of equal strength. If you had horses that were not of equal strength or who had different strides, then you got a jerky ride, because one would go a little faster or a little slower, and then the other would have to catch up. And people in a carriage, it was terrible. So they would say, unevenly yoked, have two oxen, you want them to work together. The more they work together, the smoother the ride, the more efficient, and it works beautifully. The Buddhists have had to say that these two things are not easily put together. The ride we take with Namarupa is sometimes jerky. We struggle with it. We're not quite sure how to unite them. And yet somehow the Buddhists have said you have to accept that as an individual we are these two things. And these two things are pulling us along in our life's journey. And if we feel a little bit of jerkiness, it's because they don't quite work together easily. What do you think of that? Do you feel that as a personal problem? Or is this something which the philosophers thought of to torment us? Yes?
I think sometimes we don't notice something is not efficient until we have something better. So, kind of like with technology, right? We think something is amazing until the next thing comes. And then we look at that old thing and think, how do you ever work with that? So, I wonder if, let's assume we stay on the planet a while longer, maybe as a species, and maybe we evolve and how we do things changes, and we'll look back at us, our future people will look back at us and go, how did they do anything?
Yeah, I got started with computer when we had punch cards. IBM punch cards. And we thought it was really fantastic. You could put data on a punch card, and you could make a hole in the card, and then you could pull up every card that had that hole. And sometimes you would have what was called a false drop, when you stuck the needle through the cards to pull up what you wanted. The card you really wanted fell off. Then along came the silicon chip, and as you say, all of a sudden, punch cards were nothing. Nobody wanted them. And when the silicon chip computers started coming in, I remember at Berkeley, the racks and racks of cards that had been used in the old system, where people had been paid enormous amounts of money over the years to cut the holes in these cards so the computer could read them. They were all obsolete. then the question was, do you keep all these cards for some reason? And they finally shredded them. Shredded millions of them. It was all the records of the university in some ways. A lot of the records were on those cards. So you had to try to transfer it over to the new stuff. So what Margaret says, I think, is often the case, that we search for ways to handle information, and we keep finding new ways to handle it. And some of our old ways begin to look really weird when we look back at it.
Yes. I think the philosophers have been found to be wrong in most cases on this point. That they, starting with Kant, basically, he had this idea of like the Critique of Pure Reason is like the title of his masterwork, 800-page book. He had this idea that the intellect and kind of the pure being and the physical world were kind of separate, and we had to rise above our animal instincts and pull ourselves away from those, and we had this conflict there. And I think he's been pretty well shown to be wrong in a couple of ways. In cognitive linguistics, we found pretty well most of our language is based on physical experience. And you talked yesterday about getting out of, what was the point you were talking about, but getting out of something, and it's all based on this physical experience, and also in cognitive science in general, the way our brain works. You talk about computers, this early idea of artificial intelligence in the 1950s, with the Turing test and so on, they've never been able to do it. And the reason is computers work totally different from our brain. And the way, I think there's three ideas about what intelligence is. One is this kind of idea of the brain manipulating like symbols, logical symbols, something's true, false, it's in a set, it's not in a set, and you have this mathematical formulation the brain's been shown not to work like that in cognitive science. And this other idea of the computer being able to, with artificial intelligence, a computer is really just a calculator and really just adds up numbers in better and better ways. And the modern ideas around machine learning and artificial intelligence are really just fancier and fancier calculators using statistical inference and statistical learning. Not even inference now, statistical learning what a person does in a better way. And the brain, it turns out, seems to be much more around just direct physical experience and logic in terms of spatial analysis and movement and the things we understand physically. Even ethics in terms of harming somebody physically, in terms of balancing up accounts, amounts of stuff and so on. So I think the philosophers, I don't know about Alan Wallace, but certainly Kant and a whole stream of philosophers that came after him, they didn't look at any data, they just kind of dreamed up this stuff in kind of a vacuum, which was kind of based on Christian ideals, really. It wasn't really based on actual real reason. Anyways, that's my point of it.
What's the book again?
Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T, Critique of Pure Reason.
I guarantee you have trouble sleeping. That book will help you a lot, 800 pages. Takes a while to read it. Then you've read it. However, it was an attempt to figure out the cripple and the blind. That's what he was working with. He tried one approach, as you say. There must be a way to make this thing work better, or there must be a way to explain it. And in science, Einstein had the same issue. He kept thinking everything really should work on a general principle that works everywhere at every level. And he just couldn't find it in his day. But he kept thinking it's there, otherwise God would be playing with us. And he couldn't reconcile it. He was still struggling with Anybody else?
Are we missing another, I missed part of the class, but we're talking about the mental aspect and the physical aspect, but then we also have, we're human beings, so we also have the emotional, so all those, the mental and the physical, they're all, they all work together, which, you have joy and you have sadness and you have pain,
So I think for the Buddhists, they put those under nama, emotion. Those are, and nama and rupa go together. It's very hard. The Buddhists, they say you cannot pull them apart. You have the mental and the physical. They are in a strange mixture. So we use this metaphor of the blind and the cripple. The blind tells, it's got the legs, and the cripple has the eyes. And in this very awkward way, it works. The man with the eyes can say, go straight ahead, turn left. The cripple has the legs to carry him, and they can get there. It'll work. Not easily and not elegantly, but it'll work. So the Buddhists recognize that nama rupa is not a very elegant way to say it, but it is, to some degree, an efficient, works. It has an efficiency. It works. We are a combination of nama and rupa as humans. Yes, Joe?
So how does this nama rupa, it strikes me as dualism. And a dualism that's at odds with the experience of athleticism or dance performance, that dualism of nama rupa breaks down as athletes, dancers, craftsmen and women hone their craft in that balance. That dualism seems to break down, and that seems more in the spirit of Buddhism, that there is not, that there is a middle road to nama and rupa.
They always made a big point of saying they are not separated. They really wanted to get away from dualism. They said they go together, and you can't have one without the other. That was the big difficulty for them, that there could be no real middle way in one sense, because they were necessary for each other to exist even. One only arose at the time when the other came into being. So as awkward as it was, they had to face the fact it's the way it is. These two things arise together, the physical and what we call the mental. And how can we sort out which one is which is a little bit like trying to separate soup into all its component parts. They're so entangled with one another. But I like your idea of that. Let's take a dancer. A dancer might combine, or a musician can combine the physical with an aesthetic, which is not just, we don't see it as purely physical, like playing the violin. You can play the violin physically and have no spirit to it at all. And another person can play exactly the same thing with very little difference, and yet that difference is enormous. One of them just lifts you and transports you, and the other is you plod along because it doesn't have that spirit, or it doesn't have that creativity, or that aesthetic appeal. And the same thing with dance. I could do the dance movements, but you wouldn't want to watch me do that for about 2 seconds. No elegance, none of that athleticism of the beauty and the sweep of the body and its use. So we can recognize it when we see it or hear it, but to define with the violin what part of this wonderful experience I'm having with this violin music, which part of it is the physical violin and which part is my experience of it and my interpretation of it. It's very hard to pull them apart. We seem to have it as a single unitary experience. That's why this metaphor for the Buddhists became really important, I think. The awkwardness of an efficient explanation that wasn't quite perfected to beauty yet. Good points. Anybody else? So the Buddhists use the metaphor also of a fire stick. That is, you take a piece of wood and you rub it between your hands long enough that it builds up the heat, and the heat gets to kindling temperature, and pretty soon the wood that you're doing it in starts to smolder, and then it breaks into flame. But the Buddhists say, with this kind of stick, you have to have a whole stick. You can't break it into little tiny pieces and make it work. It has to be a single thing, which you rub between your hands and cause friction. And that's why they said with Namarupa, it has to be together to be efficient. You can't break it up into its little parts and understand it. It will not it will not be efficient. But yet we have to break things up into their parts for us to understand things. That's analysis. We analyze things down into their component parts so we can hopefully understand it. Years ago I read Holdenegi, who was a biologist, and he said that he wanted to really understand muscles, because he was studying the muscle of the body. And then he realized, but muscles are made up of atoms. So how can I understand a muscle unless I'm a physicist? So he went back to school and became a physicist. He got another degree in physics so he could study the muscle from the atomic level. And when he did that, one day it dawned on him, he said, and he sat there in absolute horror, and he said, but if I break the muscle down into atoms, it's just atoms. And they have their own rules and regulations, but it doesn't really help me with the muscle. I have to come back up to a molecular level before any of my research results in something. I have to put them all back together and make something that's larger than single units. I can't analyze it down to just photons or atoms, because if I do, they don't function in the way that I want to study them. They're just doing their thing. So I have to put them back together as a molecule, then I can begin to study the thing. So it was, again, to some degree, the same issue with the stick. To be efficient, you have to understand the body at a pretty complex level, with all its organs, with all its structure. It's a system. So we have to put it back together in order to really deal with it. It has to be like the stick. It has to be a whole body that we look at. And the same with the brain. How are we to understand the brain? Well, now we know that a lot of what we thought about the brain is not true. We're getting all kinds of new information about the brain. We're trying to understand its functionality in quite a different way than we ever did before. We're trying to understand the body and its functionality. But it's, in one sense, what the Buddhists are saying is nama and rupa exist together. So you got to study rupa and you have to study nama, but you can't say that they're distinctly different from each other, because if you make them distinctly different, then you're never going to get anywhere, because that's like saying I'm going to look at only the atom and understand how my muscle works. And until I do something else, separating and splitting it up like that won't help me. I have to go back to an efficient, what I call an efficient level. So when we try to study and understand things, we have to figure out how they work at a functional level. So we're talking about Descartes. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Famous statement, everybody always quotes it. But one of the Buddhist monks brought up, well, what happens if I don't think? That I just disappear? What then? What about if I practice Buddhist meditation and I stop the process of thought? Do I just disappear? And the answer is, well, no. That is, nama rupa exists always, in one sense. As long as I'm here, so in my nama I don't think, then what happens to me? The Buddhists became very concerned about this. They became concerned about this because it raised enormous issues about meditation. Whether or not meditation takes you to a place which is potentially dangerous, or a place where you cease to be namarupa. And if you go into a meditative state where you are no longer thinking, and therefore you have disappeared, and there is no rupa, then how in the world are you to operate? How are we to deal with the world in which we live and exist? Would meditation just be a kind of suicide? If I just meditate long enough till I can get rid of all my thinking, would I then have disappeared, destroyed? They became concerned about it. They really wanted to know what happens if I stop thinking. And they dealt with this in large amounts of text. They went at it tooth and nail. And they went at it for years. So the question they had is, for the brain, that's where we think. When we meditate, we change the brain. And there are times where physically we say somebody is brain dead. What does it mean that they're brain dead? It says that if you put them on a machine that tests the electrical discharge from the brain, it's silent. There is none. Once there's no sound, there's no vibrations, there's no electrical discharge from the brain, usually it never recovers. And so, at that point, do you pull the plug on somebody? You don't keep them alive because they're brain dead, we say. We had this recently in the United States with a young woman who had been in a coma for, I don't know, 18 years or something, and husband wanted to pull the plug. And people say, you can't do that. And that is this issue of what happens if there's no thinking. Has the person ceased? It's not that you just, the body disappears. You have a body, but do you have a person? Do you have nama rupa? Or do you just have rupa and the nama is gone? And when the nama is gone, you no longer have a person. That was, the Buddhists were really concerned about this. Because for many of them, I think, they realized that at one level, they were practicing and achieving states of meditative experience which were coming very close to brain dead. They could see they were slowing things down. They were getting rid of the activity of the brain. They were putting it into a kind of quiescent state, which became so quiescent that there was hardly any noise. And how far can you go with that before brain dead? You can't reverse it. Irreversible. We think that it's a biomedical situation. It's a biomedical ethical issue. And the question is that we still face. We face it in our laws. What is a living body? At what point do you say that somebody who has no activity, no noise from the brain, is no longer a person, basically? And you let go of the rupa. Any comments? Well, we face this often in news reports. Politicians get deeply involved in all this. Yes?
I think that the issue of when to pull the plug, and especially with the young woman who was in what's medically referred to as a persistent vegetative state as opposed to brain death, is that our definition of rupa is profoundly anthropocentric. And we define
what?
Anthropocentric. That we define consciousness in terms of whether or not it appears to be human. And if that consciousness is beneath human, then we don't ascribe to it humanity or beingship. And animals and phenomena which appear to display a human-like consciousness are ascribed consciousness. And if we don't perceive the accidents of human consciousness, then we don't perceive it as conscious. But that's not necessarily true, and it would follow logically that the human species would define it seems so I don't know what to say, suspect or disappointing that humans would define consciousness based on a human standard, and it seems so obvious that that's not a standard we can apply. And we're breaking it down. We have all kinds of unusual loopholes in that. We won't allow creatures with bones to have surgery done to them without anesthesia. We've extended that to certain creatures without bones that display unusual cognitive abilities. You cannot operate on an octopus without anesthesia because of their apparent advanced cognitive abilities. Scientists have signed declarations of animal consciousness. We're progressing away from it, from the centric standard, but it's clearly one that continues to be the standard in a lot of our spiritual literature.
in terms of personally, this affected my ability to go to a zoo. I just can't do it anymore. I just can't look at those animals in that environment, which is so unnatural to them. And I feel often that particularly the bigger animals are crazy. It's driven them crazy just to entertain me. And I don't want to be entertained like that. They have consciousness, definitely. So that's just from my own personal likes and dislikes. It's come to me. I live kind of out in the country, and we have many animals that come around our house, and just observing the animals in their natural environment, which is pretty natural. They're in the park, they're out hunting and doing whatever they do. It amazes me sometimes the ways in which they operate. We have a lot of gophers, and great blue heron comes together. I thought the great blue herons only ate fish, but they don't. They eat gophers. And so when I look out, here's this great blue heron, and it's standing at a gopher hole. It's the absolute image of meditation to me. It can be just still, unmoving for a long time, waiting for the gopher. It probably can hear it or feel it, and it knows it's going to come and poke its head up. When it does, it's going to get it. I watch animals that relate to each other. We had a big white cat, and I looked out one day, and here is my big white cat pressing its nose up against the nose of a deer. They had approached each other until finally they communicated somehow. And I just wondered, I wanted to be inside their brains for a moment. What are they thinking? What has attracted them that these two very different kind of creatures would approach each other until their noses touched? It was very charming to see, but it was inexplicable to me at one level. So yes, I think consciousness is not human by any means. Yes?
I just wanted to come back to the meditation statement. I think, therefore, I am. I meditate. From my personal experience, I think the issues being raised is not because of meditation. The issue being raised is the lack of meditation. I practice Soto Zen, so the main activity of anything, or all the activity, is on Zazen. And what we focus is to learn not to think, because the statement itself is problematic. This I am that he's talking about is our ego me, is the ego I. So what I try to do in terms of from my learning curve is to, the way Dogen Senji put it is when we meditate, when we do Zazen, is to learn about ourselves. To learn about ourselves is to forget about ourselves. And I very much like that practice. He also made a statement in one of their teachings is when we meditate, what we mainly try to do is let go or drop our body and mind. That's the only time I think that I can really experience the real I, the real self, this very temporary, non-permanent, fleeting moment-to-moment self, not the I that Ducati and most people kind of think about. So I just want to go back to that. It helps me understand who I am in terms of the issue of meditation.
There's philosopher that says about Descartes that he wants to change it slightly. He wants to put in, I think that I think, therefore I think that I am.
I always heard it, I doubt, therefore.
Yeah, some people put it, but he puts in I think twice. I think that I am, therefore I think, so therefore I think I am, because I think. Yes.
I was just want to add that when the mind is quiet, the heart is also very quiet. Because I experienced myself the last time I went to see a doctor, she was having hard time hearing my heartbeat because the music was on, and she had to say, oh, your heart is so quiet. She was turning off the music and she still couldn't hear it, because what happened was the last 6-7 months, my practice is progressing pretty fast. I mean, when I first started, like the first 4 or 5 years, it was pretty slow, the progression. But the last 5-6 months, it's like, it seems to be like a lot of change going on. And it was just like a few weeks ago when I went to see a doctor, she was having a hard time hearing my heartbeat, and the heartbeat went down dramatically. Yeah. So it's the mind. When the mind is quiet, the heart is also quiet.
So is your blood pressure.
Yeah.
Everything, your whole myolism slows down.
Yeah. I got an electrocardiogram, I guess you'd call it, where they listen to your heart, and they let me hear it, and I couldn't believe that was me. I say me. I said, is that really what my heart sounds like? Yes. It sounded so mundane somehow. It was just like a washing machine. But yes, okay.
So you're saying that there were advanced meditation practitioners whose brainwaves approximate to being brain dead? Have there been advanced practitioners who haven't come back? who've...
There may well be. I once asked about the master if he was ever worried about people getting into trouble because of deep meditation. He said not too worried, because most people aren't very good at it anyway. He wasn't too worried.
In the meditation.
Oh, yeah, I would love to die in my meditation.
But I think probably when we look back at the time in India with Shakyamuni, when there were thousands of these wandering ascetics and yogins who were practicing every day and in very deep levels, I think, they must have seen lots of things happen to people. And I'm sure that some of them got into trouble and couldn't handle what happened to them because it just something. But they learned from observations, and so what we find in the texts, I often feel, are the results of their observations of looking to see what happens to people. But they did think, like the question of Descartes, we're trying to turn off the mind's function, but what are we doing if we do that? Nama and Rupa are together, so if we were able to turn off Nama, Rupa would not exist in their having stated the two arise together. So if one goes away, the other has to go away, because they can only exist together as an individual person. And at what level is another issue. I mean, you could still have forms of consciousness in a body that from one level, like our heartbeat, or would be quite low or whatever, but still functioning. But they were asking the more ultimate question, what happens? Yes?
I was going to ask, and this may be too metaphysical and far outside the boundaries of the scope of the course, but beings that inhabit different fluid fields, such as Shakti's realm and other metaphysical beings, what are their bodies' constituent parts determined as?
So can you speak up?
I said other beings, non-human beings, superhuman beings, devas, devas and other inhabitants of pure lands. What are their bodies said to be made of? Is it flesh? Is it spiritual material, or is it some other matter? Is it the same matter as the human realm, or is that just completely outside of the scope?
Well, there are three realms, and there are beings in what's called Rupa and Arupa Dhatu. And the Arupa Dhatu is, there is a realm where the spirit is totally without a body. They did have that concept. So in the Arupa Dhatu, the divinities in that realm, they would say they have no physical base. Then the question was, can they go to nirvana? And usually the answer was no. You can't go to nirvana from those high places. You have to return to the human experience. Nirvana belongs to human namarupa. So yeah, you can have these other experiences in higher realms, but the fact that you can't reach nirvana from them, only one example of a person reaching nirvana from a higher state, which is an arhat who never returns to this earth. Never returning means wherever they are, they never return, they go into nirvana from wherever they are. And that's the only example of nirvana from another state. Otherwise, all nirvana that the Buddhists have described, or that they recognized, was from the human state. So there are, in their system, they conceived of a formless state. But it wasn't permanent, and it wasn't. That's why, in one sense, for the Buddhists, to go to those states was almost like a punishment, because you couldn't reach the final enlightenment in those states, and yet, because of good karma and good action and good practice, you would go there and stay for a very long time. So they finally said, what you should do is not to practice good or bad karma, you should practice neutral karma. What you want is not to create any karma at all. Because even if you create good karma, you're just delaying. It's a delay, it's very, they had to face these issues. Now, most people are willing to have the delay. It's fine. I want to exist. I want to have many lifetimes. I want to keep going, so I'm all right with that. That's just good. Give me eternity of it even. But for others, like the Buddha at the final moment of enlightenment, as a human, he was a human, he passed on to the state with what they call nirvana, which is beyond all of this.
Well, I guess I need to tag off Joe's question. That to some degree sort of flies in the face of, I guess, being a bodhisattva, because wouldn't a bodhisattva want to reincarnate to continue to help? Indeed, true bodhisattvas would want to reincarnate in hell, because that's where most people need help. So I'm not there at that point, but so idea that actually also trying to develop as much karma as possible can be a good thing.
You know. That's why in the Theravada tradition, they said being a bodhisattva is just a temporary state. It was a temporary state of the Buddha, and he passed beyond it. And what he wanted to do was to become a Buddha. And what an arhat wants to do is to go to nirvana. And so they did not understand this. The delay of nirvana, why would you delay it?
Because my favorite Buddhist scholar says the way he interprets one of the most common vows, the one, the Four Noble One, the one that says the unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody it. The way he interpreted it, and which I really like, he said, there is no nirvana because no one reached nirvana until everybody reaches nirvana. I really like that, and I really embrace and practice that.
And there was the other position which was taken, which is to say, there is no duality of nirvana and samsara. How can you pull these two things apart? That we live with them both all the time. We just may not be aware of it. If I'm in nirvana, I often don't know it. Seems like I'm in samsara, but well, we'll take a break, but the major issue which we're discussing here is what happens if you don't think? It's basically what the Buddhists were trying to work with. And they tried to find a solution. So to bring you all back after coffee, that's what we'll talk about next hour. So let's take a 15-minute break. Yeah, Alex is right. So the Buddhists asked the question of, when somebody faints, consciousness is gone. When you take consciousness out of the body in that form, the body just collapses. It falls to the ground. So what is the difference between that loss of consciousness and a yogin who is practicing deep meditation, who is trying to free from all conscious thoughts? What makes the difference? The yogin doesn't fall to the ground. I would collapse without consciousness. Why is it that my body is so dependent on consciousness that it can't even function in its normal way? Yes?
So, look, my idea of meditation is not that it's to try and stop thinking. It's to try and stop these repeating cycles of thought that are not very useful to us. And we have this thing called like plasticity in the brain. We kind of adapt to whatever we're used to doing. And my idea of it is it's trying to stop, these kind of learned patterns and kind of break out of those rather than actually just stop thinking.
From the Buddhist perspective, a pure moment of consciousness is called citta, C-I-T-T-A, chit. When my brain processes, and the processing is called chaitasika. It's the same word, it's just been expanded, C-E. T-A-S-I-K-A, chaitasika. Same expression. Now the brain is functioning. So fainting, from the Buddhist perspective, is when chaitasika stops. But that's also what the yoga wants to do too. That was their concern here. Without Chaitasika, would I be able to have my body upright?
It's a good question, isn't it? I think they were struggling with these definitions
Yes, they
and what
were.
was going on in their minds.
They were asking the questions and they were trying to solve these issues. So for them, the relationship of the body to mind or to thought was seen as crucial, actually was seen as a life or death matter. Was that strong a question for them? So that when they saw somebody just faint and collapse, and they realized something has left this body, something turned off, an essential quality was lost. It doesn't seem to be from the physical body, it's the brain. The brain is now not functioning, so it doesn't tell the body what to do, and without being told what to do, the body can't do anything. At the same time, as a child, I used to see people kill chickens. And you cut the head off of the chicken, and it would then run around the yard with no head. So how did it have the information? It was like, it's totally separated from its Chaitasika. And yet, inherent in some part of its body was enough information to allow it to continue to do an effective act of running. Actually, for some time, it was really, I remember seeing it, it was upsetting. But, and I'm sure that the Buddhists had also recognized this, that creatures deprived of their heads could sometimes still seem to function. Whether that's the gut brain is still functioning, the other brain, somehow information is still there. So, but for the Buddhists, they were really aware of how you were trying to control what the brain does and how it functions. And that they worried that part of what they were trying to do could be dangerous. And they also were unable to explain from their perspective easily why it is that there's continuity in the body. Finally, in the Theravada tradition, they came up with a major explanation for all this called bhavanga. They explained bhavanga, and it takes a little bit to get a hold of their concept of it. They explained it in this way. A girl is sleeping under a mango tree, in deep sleep, which is dreamless. That says that at that moment, in deep sleep, dreamless sleep, there is no Chaitasika, there is no functioning of thought. That type of consciousness has been suspended. But then a breeze comes up. The mango tree starts to shake from the breeze. There is a vibration. The vibration causes a mango to fall. So the mango hits the ground right beside the girl. At that moment, she wakes up. So when she wakes up, she returns to consciousness. And the state of deep, dreamless sleep is interrupted. The Bhavanga state was considered to be a very high state. In Bhavanga, there is no suffering. In Bhavanga, there is no concerns and worries. There's no imagery. There's no idea of, I think, therefore I am. All that's gone. In that state of Bhavanga, there's nothing to complain about. So they decided that in this deep state of sleep, dreamless sleep, the brain functioned in a certain way, or the mind functioned in a certain way, and it was not totally dead, though. You could rouse it. They saw this. You could be in very, very deep sleep. For most of us, it's not the mango. What is it?
Alarm clock.
The alarm clock or your cat. Some